Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 6 of the Climate Pioneers Show. Throughout the course of this series, we are going to be discussing the challenges around scaling deep tech solutions within climate. I'm going to be speaking to investors, founders, venture builders, and other key ecosystem players, all focused on the common goal of scaling and commercialising deep tech innovations. We're going to explore how to prepare for the unique challenges that deep tech companies face along their growth journey. And we're going to hear stories from those who have successfully scaled to Series A and beyond. So whether you are a founder yourself who's looking to build a business in the climate space, perhaps you're an investor who's keen to learn more about investing into deep tech solutions, or maybe you're just somebody that's really interested in climate innovation and the cool things that people are building. Whatever your background, hopefully there will be something for you throughout the course of this series. And today I'm joined for episode 4 by Dr. Stafford Lloyd, the innovation lead for clean growth strategy at Innovate UK, who's working on a programme to catalyse private investment into climate tech, which is a hugely important part of the puzzle in unlocking growth for deep tech startups. So Stafford, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, no, thank you very much for having me. I'm honoured and humbled to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. And joining me straight fresh off your holiday. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. So before we talk about the interesting work that you're doing at Innovate UK, I, as a recruitment person, always love to hear about people's own journeys and what their career path was, the route that they took to get into the climate space. So you started in aeronautical engineering. Talk us through how your career path led you to where you are now at Innovate UK.
Okay, wow. All right. So I suppose it all starts for me. So I, despite my engineering background, I've always been really interested in environmental issues. You know, the one thing that kind of came to my mind when you first posed this question, I remember 20 years ago when I was at university, and obviously back then computers were a lot less capable than they are now, and they used to actually run networks of personal computers to run climate models.
Oh.
And me and all my friends at university, being geeks as we were engineers back then, you took part in this program. And I remember on our personal PCs, they had this little spinning globe that used to come up when the model was running. So even back then, I was, I suppose, quite passionate about environmental issues, even though I was studying something which most people argue is promoting things that aren't that environmentally friendly. The irony is not lost. But I think the real kind of inflection point for me was post-university. To be honest with you, I think like a lot of people early in their career, I didn't really quite know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work on the environment or on climate change or something like that. And I stumbled across, somewhat luckily, something called an engineering doctorate program, which an engineering doctorate, they still run, is basically like an industrially based PhD. Okay. So instead of sitting in a university, you sit in a company and you research challenges that company kind of sets, and you with the aim of kind of helping the company develop, whilst also gaining a doctoral qualification. Okay. It's typically longer than a PhD. It's 4 years, not 3. It has a taught element. You get paid more money, so there's kind of a different aspect to it. But I was very lucky to join an NGD program that was run at the University of Surrey. Back then it was called the Centre for Environmental Strategy. I think it's now called the Centre for Environment and Sustainability. And that was co-sponsored by Rolls-Royce, who obviously make jet engines. So that's kind of the aeronautical link. And it was a real, I suppose, almost like honour to. I mean, it was at the time, and I think it still is, quite an internationally renowned centre for what back then we used to call sustainable development. And the topic was environmental technology, but I got to learn about sustainability and things like life cycle assessment from real international thought leaders in the field. So people like Tim Jackson, who I know people who are deep into sustainability might have heard of. He's written some quite controversial books, you might argue, things like Called Prosperity Without Growth. Has been writing about topics that relate to sustainability that some people consider still to be quite new and radical, even as far back as the early kind of 1990s. People like Professor Roland Clift, who pioneered some of the methodology behind life cycle assessment. So to learn and study in that environment, also sponsored by a company, by Rolls, like with a company like Rolls-Royce. Yeah, it was quite, and I just happened to stumble on it. It was very right place, right time, like a lot of people's careers. I think it's a combination of luck and judgment. So that was, in the end, I worked, did my PhD, published some papers, got to do some cool stuff, got deep into topics like critical materials, things like that. And, this is back when even terms like the circular economy were only kind of really developing and coming to the fore. So we're talking like 15 years ago. Yeah. But after 7 years, I decided that I wanted to pursue a more radical path, should we say.
Okay.
So that's when I joined Riversimple, who are still going, and probably a lot of people haven't heard of, but they're a small company that are basically trying to develop hydrogen-powered cars. Although the real innovation for me at Riversimple is not necessarily the fact it's a hydrogen-powered car, it's the technology behind it that makes it radically efficient, and also the business model and how that extends into things like the governance structure behind the company, which is really interesting. So I also played a part in some of those high-level dealings about how you actually connect the incentive structure in the enterprise with the business model and how it makes money, and how that drives actually the development of the technology, and how ideally all these things are interconnected, and you need to deal with them in a systemic way. So again, I spent just over 4 years there. It was a startup in the beginning, felt less startup-y towards the end. But again, Hugo Spowers, who was my boss and leader of the company, again, I still consider him to be a kind of thought leader and visionary in the kind of sustainability space. He introduced me to the writings of people like E.F. Schumacher, which, if you're into sustainability, I'd encourage you to look at. And I worked on everything, like you're doing a small business, from obviously being an engineer, the tech, to the business model, working with supply chain, procurement, governance, and I suppose the core part of my role centered around, in the end, collaborative program management, so R&D, and basically getting money in to help with our R&D effort, which I was reasonably successful in. I think my grant strike rate is still 5 out of 8, which is pretty high, I think. And I basically got into that world. I think it's like, again, like most people's careers and networks, just by getting out there, meeting people, and I became friendly with, just by rubbing shoulders and bumping into people from Innovate and what was then called the Knowledge Transfer Network at different conferences and things like that. Talked about our ideas. They thought it was really interesting. Opportunities came up. I fully exploited the services available to help us develop those and get some funding. And I kind of turned out to be really quite good at it, enjoyed it. So when it came to thinking about next steps after Riversimple, I thought, well, I wonder what the view's like from the other side of the table, and like looking at that was one kind of avenue of opportunity that I identified. So I basically applied for a job at Innovate 6 years ago, got it. It was a bit left field. I actually worked for 2.5 years on the digital program that was run on Horizon, so the EU funded program that, whilst it was post referendum, it was pre the UK formally leaving the EU, so we were still involved in all of the formal structures. So I basically spent 2.5 years sat around tables in Brussels with lots of people being really unpopular because of Brexit, but we still had to play our role in being active in those decision-making structures. And it was quite an interesting, a fascinating time to be involved in directly with the European Commission, as I suppose you could probably imagine. And then when we formally left, I always had a goal to get back to what was my core passion or topic area, which was sustainability and climate change. So an opportunity came up to basically help Innovate UK develop its net zero strategy. Right. And I was fortunate to get the job, and that's what I've been working on kind of ever since. First in the strategy role, and now more delivering on what we saw as the main market failure, which is around getting investment into new technology and basically making that happen a lot faster.
Yeah. So talk us through the problem on that, right? Because in the intro, I gave a very high level summary of what it is, right? And so driving private sector investment into climate tech. And before we go into how you're doing that, talk us through what was the landscape prior to starting this? Like, why is that a problem? How is that demonstrably a problem in the space?
I mean, I don't think. I mean, I almost think this is a one. I suppose, development of what has been quite a significant historic issue in the UK with commercialising R&D. And I don't think it probably news to most people to say, I almost think it's kind of like the British disease, that we're very good at coming up with ideas and developing to the point where they're kind of technically proven but not commercially scaled.
Right.
And then we seem to then do a very poor job of realizing the benefits, the commercial benefits of scaling those technologies. So I think what we're seeing in climate tech is one almost like development of a wider scale phenomenon almost in the UK, that we're basically not very good at commercializing things, or reaping the benefits of it, I suppose, is the one challenge. But why
is that? Is that because the companies fold, or do we into international? Like, do they spread internationally? Like, what does happen?
So, I suppose anecdotally, I think it's a combination of factors. I mean, I think obviously working in Innovate, you reflect on yourselves and the things that we can do or don't do as not just as Innovate, but as broader public sector to support innovation. And there's probably more that can be done. But I think it's a combination of factors around the investment community, and without being too unfair, I think they would accept there's maybe a degree of risk aversion when it comes to supporting new technologies. You could say that links to the government piece, where there isn't a sufficient and consistent, stable environment for which to enable those technologies to thrive, whether that be in terms of regulation or funding support, or I suppose just almost like the stability of the economy, for want of a better phrase. And I think there are also, particularly now post-Brexit, potentially more issues around market access and size. Like traditionally, you want, when you're looking at investing in a technology, you want to know that there's a sufficient market scale that means that you can, the product can be widely successful and people can make lots of money and you can get your return. You know what I mean? So, and obviously where the UK is right now, whilst we still have links to, we're not as embedded in the main EU market or the US market, which are the two biggest consistent ones. So, but I don't know, it almost sounds like a bit of a paradox, really. We do put a lot of money into R&D, but I mean, I remember working with people on Horizon and professors saying, I'm now having to buy widgets from the States, where I basically, I was the person who developed the underlying technology. Why do I now have to buy this from America? And I don't know, it's a good question. But yeah, I think, and I think what's more relevant now is obviously this problem is becoming particularly acute, because we're at a point where we basically have to solve this. We don't really have a lot of time left. If we want to hit net zero by 2050, and you think about how long things really take to technically scale, I think it's still possible. But basically, people talk about this. I remember one of my first jobs I had to do in this new role was at COP26, which was, I'll lose a track of time, was it 2020 or 2021? But this is supposed to be the decade of action, and we're now almost halfway through. And I'm not seeing enough action, I don't think. And because if we are to scale these technologies in a way that's going to meaningfully realize the emissions reduction, it kind of needs to start now. So we really need these investment challenges to be unpacked and solved, kind of in pretty short order. And I'm kind of hoping maybe that the focus and the need is going to help drive action. But we'll see. We're starting on a journey to see how we can we can play a role in addressing that. But it's, I think it's almost the it's the question of our times. Is what I spend most of my waking life thinking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah.
And so one of the solutions to that kind of investment conundrum, and that first of all, that challenge of how can we take this innovation and take this R&D and help to commercialize and scale it, and secondly, that piece around how can we drive more investment to support this. Talk us through the solution that through Innovate UK you came up with, and the program that you're working on as a result.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, when we look at this, sorry, we need more investment, but then obviously there's lots of underlying factors kind of beneath that as to why things aren't scaling and why the investment isn't flowing. But I think going back to the risk aversion piece, I think the fundamental challenge is there's almost like a mismatch in risk appetite, right. And this in part stems from the kind of VC community's grown up and developed a lot around software, whereas for climate you need hardware and software. You generally need integrated systems, and I think digitalization is a big part of it. But you need hardware, and hardware is hard. From a better phrase, it takes more time. There's more risk, and the levels of funding you need to develop it are higher. So there's essentially a mismatch between the risk profile of the technology and the almost like the risk appetite of the investment landscape. So I think I started off on this program thinking what we almost need to do is innovate the financiers to a degree, but I think there's also things that we can do to help de-risk things, basically. So I think there's two sides to it. Is how do you help to de-risk it, but then how do you also drive almost innovation in the finance community? So I suppose the core thing that I'm personally working on, that there's a few things that our program is doing, but to go straight to the heart of what I think is one of the more interesting things that we're doing, is obviously one of the main drivers of risk is basically a lack of almost like market demand, or the kind of market pull for innovation that we saw. And because there isn't that almost like market certainty, whilst you expect a degree of market uncertainty, it's almost like the uncertainty is too high, again, versus the level of investment you need to scale the hard technology. So we basically thought, well, if the market uncertainty is too high, or the demand pull isn't there, are there things that we can do to almost help stimulate that? So we started off talking about what we used to call, and another kind of phraseology has changed, is kind of demand-led innovation. So rather than doing what we traditionally do, which is give out grants, which is more technology push, but basically stimulate a market pull. And the one particular tool that we identified that we thought could meaningfully help shift the dial in terms of really evidencing and accelerating that market pull, that would then provide the certainty, de-risk it to the extent that the private investment would flow, and then the technology would scale, with something called an advanced market commitment. So I'm running a pilot program that's basically looking at how we as an agency can deploy this tool to accelerate innovation.
And is something, this was sort of an idea borrowed almost from other industries where it's worked well. So it's sort of, talk us through where it's worked well, where you've seen it work well in other industries, and how you think it could mirror into this space.
So the main precedent for AMCs, as you call them, advanced market commitments, is in vaccine development. So it's been applied twice now. So the first was in, I think it's not the only, but the early application was in the pneumococcal vaccine for developing countries, where basically the market wasn't sufficiently certain to drive the R&D that was needed in the vaccine. So a bunch of organizations got together and said, right, we will commit to buy a vaccine before it's been developed if you develop it. And that it was that prior commitment. And that's basically what an AMC is. It's a commitment to buy. And I think that's a key word. It's a commitment. It's enacted legally. So there's a contract. It's not just a kind of I don't
Not
know.
like a letter of intent, not an LOI.
Yeah, it's not a demand signal. It's not a kind of a public announcement, or there are lots of initiatives where people say they're making commitments, but by this we mean it's legal. And we're actually currently working a lot with lawyers to understand properly how we can actually legally enact this. But yeah, and it's a commitment to buy something that's not commercially ready. So it's almost like there was an article actually in The Economist a while ago that touched on AMCs, and the phrase they used, which I quite like, was incentivizing R&D by promising to buy its fruits, and that's kind of basically what it is. In a sense, is a simple concept. It's not complicated. There's also you might expect it was used during COVID to accelerate vaccine development. And the one other notable example, which I would point people to if they want to really understand the kind of process, I'd say that the people behind this are a bit ahead of us in terms of their AMC, and what they've published around it is an organisation called Frontier, which is basically a non-profit. I think it's wholly owned by Stripe, but that are aiming. I think it's funded by most of the big tech companies, kind of Meta. I think Microsoft are involved. Don't quote me on that, but it's kind of like there's you can go to the website. They're all there, and that's an advanced market commitment for carbon removals. So the head of that, a lady called Nan Ransohoff, she's published a whole load of articles linked to the University of Chicago Market Shaping Accelerator. It's led by Nobel Prize winning economists, so they know what they're talking about. But they about basically how to do this. So it's interesting how we were working on our AMC program and the initiation of it, and the same time they were doing theirs, but we're doing it independently. And we've now kind of found out about each other, but I'd say they're a few steps ahead. But yeah, so that's basically what it is, which is not complicated in theory, but the actual practice of trying to basically corral together a group of organizations to agree contractually to buy something that doesn't exist.
Yes. They will be trying to de-risk every element of that for themselves. So I would imagine at the point of making the agreement to purchase, there will be so many caveats that they will want to add in to make sure that it does exactly what they need it to do, right? Before they're committed to buy. And will that vary for each corporate partner? And I'm assuming it's corporate partners that you're going to for this, right?
Yeah, so we're focusing on concrete and cement products, which sounds a bit random. People say you're doing innovation program in concrete. What's innovative about concrete? Well, it's a huge decarbonisation challenge, as probably as most people are aware, and I think it's real also fertile ground for new solutions. And it's really, I actually find it quite fascinating. And we did do some pre-work, and again, independently, Chicago, that was one of their top areas. They said for more AMCs was in concrete and cement products, but so we're piloting in that, and the organizations we're mainly working with are kind of large asset owners, kind of infrastructure clients. Basically the funders of assets, large assets that use a lot of concrete. So you imagine, and we've also got some kind of like big tier one contractors involved and organizations like that. But it's so organizations buying lots of concrete. You could probably, and I think was it something like roughly half of the concrete use is in some way linked to the public sector or public infrastructure. So the public sector has quite a significant role to play. So you can probably imagine the type. I'm not going to name check any of the types of organizations that we're working with who are very large users of concrete have, and this is what I think is really driving it. They have really quite ambitious decarbonisation goals, and they recognise that their concrete demand is a big problem in meeting this. And so I think we've been quite lucky in a way in that we're kind of really pushing on an open doors. Whilst the idea sounds really wacky in a way, we've actually been quite successful in getting a large number of, so about a dozen organisations to agree to basically join our kind of AMC journey. None of them have made a commitment yet, but none of them have basically turned around and said, no, we fundamentally think this is the wrong way to go, or not something worthwhile to do. All I'm basically saying is, if this is a mechanism that's going to unlock the investment, which is the key thing, that we think is needed in new infrastructure to scale the solutions that we see coming down the pipeline, then we're all for it. And basically, what can we do to help? So I feel like it's like any new program in a way. Whilst it's not academic, I almost feel like I'm back on my doctoral program. It wasn't like there was a kind of roadmap of this is how to make an AMC, or let alone do it in concrete products. It was kind of like AMC in concrete at the top of a blank sheet of paper, and let's go and fill it in. Which has been fun but quite challenging. I've been very lucky. I should mention that we at the beginning we did some like pre-work, and then basically I recognized I wouldn't have the bandwidth to do this on my own. We needed a whole team of people, and also clever people who also know a bit about AMC. So we basically brought in, we procured a consultancy called Carbon Limiting Technologies, who are a sister organisation of the Clean Growth Fund. Okay. Few people listening to this might recognise. And they one of their team is a very capable economist. Is basically what he needed. One of the guys at Chicago, they're economists, who had experience in AMC development. And I'll be honest, it's mainly John Ward, who's the guy supporting, as well as Natalie Fredericks, who's the COO at Carbon Limiting Technologies, who are the real kind of, I'll be frank, brain power behind this. But we're obviously pointing them at problems that we think need to be solved and helping us address high-level questions around, how do we make sure this becomes a self-sustaining initiative? What other sectors do we apply it to? How do we learn from this in terms of this being a tool that Innovate UK can use more widely to accelerate innovation? But yeah, so far it's, I think we had a stretch target to get a commitment in place and use this as a springboard to help unlock the investment in a solution of the kind of folk level, a first of a kind kind of infrastructure plan. So that's the kind of size of it, and people might be able to guess what that is. And that's private investment. That's not money that we're putting in. We have funded an innovation competition, but there was just over £3 million. But yeah, that's.
Do you start with winding it back, just to kind of headline the concept then, is that you go out to these corporate partners and you get them to make a legal binding commitment that they will purchase a product once it's been developed. And then you can take that commitment to the investors, to VCs, and say, we have a legal commitment here. Can you give us the money? Can you give us the funding? Because if we can build this thing, they will buy. And that should unlock the money in theory. Cool. And cement being the first pilot for that, because it's one where you've got this lovely combination, or not lovely, but lovely from your perspective, but not. It's got huge decarbonisation potential, a lot of incentive and willingness from the industry to tackle the problem, and some big players that have money set aside to tackle the problem, but there's no clear solution yet. Cool. Yep. When it comes to that way around, chicken and egg, do you get the solution first? So you have a solution in mind, and now you're going out to partners in that space to say, this is the solution, this is what we're looking to build, do you want to commit to buy? Or do you go out to the big players first and say, what are the problems, what do you need solving? And then go and find people who are solving it. Which way around do you do that?
So I think it's in a way it's solution first, but it's a bit, I suppose it's a little bit of both, to be honest. So the key to unlocking the AMC is what's called a target product profile.
Right.
And in a way you can develop that kind of top down or bottom up. And we've kind of done it a bit of both. So we've spoken to all the clients and kind of said, what do you guys need or want? And the key is that it's in an ideal sense, and we're still debating whether or not we stick to this kind of principle or deviate from it. It should almost be solution agnostic. So you'll basically have a whole list of criteria that cover technical aspects, economic aspects like price, other aspects like regulatory approvals, all, there's about half a dozen different characteristics that form this target product profile. And then basically the AMC is enacted once, if a solution comes along that basically says, look, I meet this profile, there has to be a degree of independent oversight and approval. Obviously, carbon performance is an important part of that as well. So there needs to be the kind of carbon benchmarking and almost like the kind of underlying carbon assessments that you need to enable that, which I think are kind of there in particularly in concrete cement products. And that's kind of that's what's enacted. But then we did also recognise that actually the cement and concrete innovation space is quite busy. So in part, the reason why we ran the grant competition is we basically wanted to surface the solutions to say, okay, well, this is probably what you think you want, but actually look at all these other interesting things that you haven't considered.
Yeah.
So where I hope we will end up is that I think we'll probably support things, and I can probably preempt some of the things that might come out of the other end in terms of the actual solutions that get funded. Because in the end, there has to be a delay, because almost by definition, if you're committing to something that is not commercially available, the day after you commit to it, you can't buy it. Do you know what I mean? There has to be a period of almost like development time and other work, and including the investment side, to almost like deliver on the commitment. And that, what we basically see is the AMC is like a high level framework that under which will eventually sit a series of offtake agreements that will in the end manifest in the pouring of concrete in whatever low carbon concrete, obviously, hopefully. But it's kind of like we can kind of preempt. I think some of the solutions that have come down the line, but even now, I think we're seeing that some of the more left field solutions that weren't on the radar of these big clients are now really starting to get their attention. So what I'm kind of hoping is that, because really what we want to do is accelerate things and make things happen now and quicker. I think what probably is worth caveating this, or what we're doing here probably isn't, or probably in the end won't lead to anything that wouldn't have happened anyway, but what will happen is it'll happen a lot quicker, and that's the whole idea. We want to accelerate the innovation process, and that's principally, I see, the role of Innovate. It's accelerating stuff that probably would have already happened, just a lot slower. But also then looking at those solutions that are further down the line and saying, actually, this solution that we're supporting now probably solves, I don't know, half of our carbon problem, but we recognise we've got the other half to solve, and we really like these things that we're now going to also really initiate that kind of market pull on. So,
and you said this has been really well received so far in the concrete and cement industry for the reasons we've mentioned. I'd imagine it's been well received in the startup community, because why wouldn't it be? What about on the VC side? How, in the conversations that the exploratory conversations you've had with them, has that gone down? And do you think this will work? Will this be something that will encourage them to unlock investment quicker?
So, I mean, I think the VCs love it in a sense, because what we've done is almost like provided a very visible pipeline and demand signal. So it's almost like, well, here's your market and here's your solutions. What do you need?
Exactly.
I think that aspect has obviously been seen as beneficial. I think the real challenge is going to be when it comes to unlocking almost like the real scale of investment. I think when you start looking at, the kind of, I mean, we call it like the kind of Series B type challenge, but it's that real difficult period where you basically need the big slugs of investment to scale something, whether it's building a plant, building factories, it's all the hard, unsexy stuff that you need to do if you're going to actually, think about making things legally compliant. It's far less fun than building a first of a kind prototype. Do you know what I mean?
And this could work at that level too, right? I mean, I was speaking to someone on one of our previous episodes about unlocking that kind of next level of investment up, looking at kind of more debt finance and project finance. And they were saying that in order to do that, you need to be able to demonstrate repeatable, forecastable income over a considerable period of time. And I'd imagine this instrument, an AMC, could work well there, right? If you were doing it bigger horizon, longer time scale.
Yeah. And that's in part the theory. And I mean, I'll be honest, we haven't dug too deeply into I'd say to the same degree. It's still on our, I'd say it's almost like part of the next phase of the program is to really nail is what the AMC, the emerging AMC that we've kind of come up with, is that really going to meet the needs of the kind of infrastructure investors? I mean, the initial signals are, I'd say, are positive, but yeah, that's I mean, being honest, is something that we're still, a lot of this, I'd like to say, is exploratory. It's a pilot that we're digging into, but I always think it's kind of like it's a three-way problem between the solutions, the market, and the demanders, and the end users, and then the investors. And you want to basically come up with something that meets all three of those stakeholder groups' kind of expectations. But yeah, I'll say the initial signs are positive, and people like the change in emphasis from push to pull, basically, which I think is, I say it's simple in theory, but the practice is difficult.
And I imagine it's like one of those things. Every single step opens a new can of worms of a new problem to be solved and a new thing to think about. And what time scale are you running this pilot across? And by which point will you sort of go, right, okay, yeah, this works? What's success, or what is the determinant of this works?
So the pilot was 18 months.
Right.
I did pre-work with 6 months, and we're about halfway through. So it gives you a sense of where we are. And the success for the pilot phase is to have a commitment, the kind of top level commitment based on the target product profile from a series of clients that's of sufficient scale to unlock that investment. And that's our kind of ambition. It feels very ambitious, but I'm like, well, we need to be ambitious. And I think there's a route towards realizing that. But then obviously there's an operational phase, and we're still planning around how that's going to work and what our role is going to be in doing that. I mean, it's interesting speaking to other people who've done AMCs. Almost one piece of feedback I've had is quite strange in the sense that a public agency is kind of funded the development of this, because we Innovate UK doesn't use a lot of concrete. You're probably surprised to learn. You'd usually be led by a group of organisations that are actually buying the stuff.
The consortium, yeah.
But because we thought we were quite easy to justify this. Ultimately we all, this is public money, and we have to be accountable. And we say that there's a clear market failure here that we can justifiably say this is why we're doing it. But yeah, the kind of operational onward model, I think we are going to. So we're now entering another spending cycle, as I know people probably heard. I think it's just been announced publicly. So we are going to be looking at how we can provide further financial support to operationalize it, then also what the model in terms of becoming self-sustaining is going to look like longer term.
I was going to ask about that, because for something like this, is it for this to be self-sustaining and to scale beyond Innovate organising it, who would normally own that? Would there be a separate third party that would be tasked with running these? You said there it's often a conglomerate, a consortium of end buyers that would get together to do this. But if they haven't necessarily had the idea to, could there be separate third party organisations that spearhead this in different sectors, do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be that's kind of the precedent. So whether it's with Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, or TIR, which is the Carbon Removals Alliance, in the end, I think it's been consortiums of organisations, businesses, generally large businesses, that have an interest in ensuring the outcomes are successful of the AMC and the solutions that it supports. So that would be the natural kind of end point in terms of word, like end of the beginning in a sense. And then the AMC would run and the commitments would be enacted and solutions are scaled and everyone will have tons and tons of low carbon concrete. We'll all be really happy. So exactly, and I'll be honest, we're not precious about this. I mean, one of my almost kind of missions from the program, which is part of the reason why I'm talking to you today, is we want to socialize this idea and this concept, and we're not precious. Everything we'll be doing will be put in the public domain. The how we did it, the successes, failures, learnings, future plans, and we would encourage anybody who thinks this is a great idea to come and speak to us, pick it up and do it. Read Nan's article about how to do an AMC, and I think we basically want more AMCs. I mean, I suppose the caveat is, we recognise it's not necessarily a silver bullet. I'm always conscious of being the proverbial person with a hammer thinking every problem's a nail. And I don't think AMCs are the solution to everything, but I think in a lot of hard to abate sectors in particular, we see them as a useful tool to really help drive the market, and hopefully the development of solutions. So
Absolutely. And you mentioned sort of earlier on in the call that this is one of a myriad of challenges that deep tech and hardware focused startups face. In your role at Innovate, and especially in your role driving net zero strategy, what are the other kind of common challenges that you're seeing that are uniquely faced by hardware businesses in the climate space outside of this investment piece? Are there other key things that you see come up time and again?
I mean, it's just, I suppose it's just hard. I mean, where do you start? I mean, obviously, as an engineer by background, and having spent time in a startup and really having to get, I've had to deal with these issues firsthand, hands-on. How do you take something that works, which is kind of like the easy bit, and then make it kind of successful at scale? Is difficult. I mean, I almost kind of say you can almost kind of play like innovation bingo, and any sectoral challenge, the same issues tend to raise their head. There's issues around, I think particularly when it comes to manufacturing things at scale or plants, I think there is almost like some capability needs or gaps, and I do see a lot of companies almost recognizing that actually building a factory and manufacturing something themselves isn't probably the best way forward. And there's organizations out there that know how to do that and can do it. Larger organizations have those capabilities, and it's much better kind of maybe partner with somebody who already has the know-how about how actually I mean, I actually worked in manufacturing engineering for a year in my distant past, and I know all of the different ins and outs of actually how do you mass manufacture something, and it's a very different engineering challenge. And I think I quite liked it. Was it Jeff Bezos or one of those guys who I think they were talking about some of the things they're doing around one of their projects? Can't remember what it was, basically saying that the mass manufacture is actually harder, and even those big tech guys who are looking at these issues is actually getting into this and going, this is difficult. But then you can look at issues around, the classic things around regulations and standards. I think linked to that is we're really interested in looking at the insurance market. And I think there are potential gaps around insuring new technologies, or maybe not insuring them per se, but insuring them, the cost of the insurance not being such that basically it makes it commercially not viable. And there's a need to provide, for example, lots more data on. I mean, this is very relevant to concrete structures. Obviously, coming from aviation, I can relate to this. It's very safety critical technology. You don't want a building to fall down. You don't want a plane to fall out of the sky. So if you're going to insure these things, and it's new technology that people actually there's no maybe track record, or there's not a lot of data there to say, well, actually, what is the risk of this technology failing? There's That's one challenge. You could talk a lot about skills, but yeah, I mean, I must admit, for me, the investment piece is probably our main focus, and really that going back to that core problem of when it's too risky almost sounds kind of quite obvious. So how do you take away some of the risk? And there's other things we're looking at doing linked to that as well as the AMC, that I think are really cool and interesting.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a little bit. So I mean, it's not. I mean, I think we're kind of we've preempted a bit the zeitgeist, but obviously there's a lot of interest now in co-financing. So how do you blend public and private investment? And I think people recognise that there is actually quite a lot of dry powder, what people like to call it, out there, and money almost waiting for things to invest in. And if you can de-risk it sufficiently, the money will start to flow. And I think that's the role of the public sector. I think new governments latched onto this, that actually you don't have to fund it all publicly. You can provide a bit of catalytic public capital, and that will unlock quite a lot of private investment.
Right. Because by doing so is a demonstration or a commitment that de-risks it to a certain extent.
Yeah. Or does so in such a way that either reduces the downside or increases the upside for the private investor, such that they're willing to take a riskier bet. So there's things like that as well. I must admit, we're doing other things. I should mention we run a regular event called Capital to Climate, which is with our excellent partners, Climate Connection, and we just generally saw the need to, I suppose, make more accessible the range of almost like technologies and sectors and challenges that are related to net zero and the investment opportunities that are linked to them, to kind of like a wider investment audience. So that's it's really that inform piece, as well as on net zero and the variety of opportunities. So these are kind of soft interventions we can make, as well as we think part of the challenge is kind of connecting the capital stack. So how do you create that pipeline from like early stage investors to later stage investors, which is again something we're trying to tackle. We're not going to, I suppose, solve it all ourselves, but we're trying our best.
Absolutely. And what are you excited about for the rest of this year? I assume by the end of this year, the pilot will be finished. Is that right? Does that take you to about the right?
Yeah, it's the end of this financial year, so it's probably going to run until the end of March next year, and there might be a bit of overrun, but yeah, that's broadly it. And then then there'll be hopefully new things that we'll be able to talk about, depending on how the spending review goes.
Yeah, perfect, cool. And is there anything else that you think at industry level needs to be changed or could be improved? I mean, there'll be lots, it's a very big question, I suppose, but is there anything that kind of comes to mind immediately that you think at a kind of macro level needs to be changed or improved to drive that pace of innovation, that would help you to drive the pace of innovation as well?
The one area that I think I'm really interested in, and I don't know, I'd welcome people who might know more about this to kind of reach out. I'd be keen to discuss it more. It's basically, I think there's still the role of corporates, I think, is I don't know the best way to phrase this about being unfair. Basically, I think there's some heavy lifting to be done, and they're the people to do it. And I remember I was at an event a while ago, and it was going back to this like innovating the financiers. And I think there's a guy who ran a fund on the panel who felt like he was getting a bit of, I think fairly like people say, oh, come on, the VCs need to look at things differently, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, hang about, look, right. Big corporates have way more money than we do. And they're the ones who own a lot of these problems. Like, why aren't you having a go at them? To paraphrase his kind of like counter argument. And I think he had a very valid point. And I'm really interested in, I think it's kind of links to this demand-led innovation piece in the parts of the AMC, is where we also saw it as one mechanism for us to start working with these big organizations to say, look, how can we help you invest and focus more on not necessarily the technologies that we fund, but the technologies that we think you should be interested in to help you solve your decarbonisation challenges.
Yeah.
I think So I think there's a real question around can big businesses do more? Having worked for 7 years in a big business, I do remember it a while ago, understand how they work. But I think, we as an agency, a public agency, I think are kind of pushing the boundaries, trying to do things differently. I think now we need to maybe start, so old cliche, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. I think, we need to push them maybe more towards the edge of their comfort zone. So, look, this is getting quite acute now. We need to start doing things differently. We're not expecting them to do everything, but I think bringing them to the party a bit more. And I'm interested in how we can do that as an agency as well. Work more with big businesses and really couple their, because going back to how do you scale things? They're the organizations that know how things work, and big things happen, right?
Scale,
So that's the one gap in the landscape that I know maybe they are doing loads of stuff that I'm just not aware of because I'm not too much involved in that environment. But I know I don't see it at the minute, so I'm keen to learn more about what's happening there and how we can help those organizations maybe take more risks.
Absolutely.
Could be quite interesting. But anyway, so that's my one thing I'd like to see.
I like that. Perfect. Cool. Well, Stafford, thank you so much for spending nearly an hour with me, sharing everything that you're working at the agency Innovate UK, and talking us through this very interesting world of advanced market commitments. Thank you so much. And if there's anybody listening that wants to get in touch and learn more about what you're doing at Innovate UK, how can they do so?
LinkedIn is the best way. I've been on holiday, so I've been a bit inactive. I always think these are out of office, but anyway. We're generally quite active on LinkedIn. Please drop me a line. And generally speaking, if I can't help, I will at least, if not know somebody who probably knows somebody. So we're more than happy to signpost and support and help in any way we can.
Lovely. Well, thanks again, Stafford. Thank you to everybody that's listened today.